Welcome back for now the 10th episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Finally hit double digits. Big milestone, or at least it feels like it. Maui Invitational has wrapped up for the most part anyway. We have the champion. They played that game at 5 o'clock Eastern time. Still a couple games to be played tonight. One of those games being played has been probably the most disappointing team of the Maui Invitational, and that has been UConn. Lost 2 games. Opening day to Memphis, who went on what many may consider a Cinderella run to the championship before falling to Auburn today, and we'll talk more about Auburn in a bit. And then took down Michigan State, who I kind of thought, especially after UConn went down, I thought Michigan State had a good shot to get to the final and maybe win the whole thing. But Memphis played really good basketball. But UConn, I'll start with this. Dan Hurley is a psycho. He gets away with some stuff that I've never seen any coach get away with, the way that he talks and acts. And like, if you didn't know any better, if you didn't know that UConn had won 2 straight national championships, you would think this guy belongs in a mental hospital.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy to watch, honestly. He probably just wasn't really used to being in those spots, especially in non-conference. I think that was his first non-conference loss on a neutral court since 2022, or when they lost in the tournament last. But yeah, it was very weird to watch. And then the interview after the game, where like he wouldn't even own up to his mistakes, really. Like, he basically cost his team the game, and then he continued to just be extremely upset over that one call with McNeely. I personally don't think it was a foul, but like, refs are going to make calls like that. It was closer to 50-50 than anything. So, but he needs to calm down on the sideline.
Here's my thought, right? And it's always been my thought. I was taught this from a very young age, and I think a lot of people in basketball could learn something from it, is that the sooner you accept that all referees are bad, and I've done some reffing, right? Like, reffing is not easy. It's a tough gig, especially at that high level where the pace is so quick, and at Maui where everything's just right on top of you, right? You don't have the space that you might have at some of these other courts. It's a tough job, and you're always going to have half the people unhappy about a call that you make. So it's really a thankless job. But I think as a player, as a coach, the sooner you accept that referees are going to make mistakes, the better off that you are. Because, like, for me, I don't even worry about the officials. Like, by the end of the game, I just assume that everything kind of worked itself out, right? Maybe on a certain day things don't, but for the most part, like, it's just how it goes. And I think Hurley's obviously cost his team the game here. And then they wound up losing yesterday to Colorado, who we were kind of talking pretty down on Sunday. That's a really, really good win, right? So UConn, I don't take a ton of stock, as we were talking about earlier. I don't take a ton of stock in this tournament, right, or any of these preseason tournaments. It's more for the consumer, right, where it's just constant basketball from noon to, I don't know what time the game ended last night. I fell asleep, but probably 1:30, 2 a.m. It's good for the consumer, but in terms of like the realistic basketball play, it's not that serious, right? Like, come tournament time, these guys have a day to prep or a whole week to prep. Like, you're trying to prep for teams 3 days straight. So it's just not that realistic. And teams get hot, like Memphis. I don't think Memphis is that good, right? That, like, they're solid, they're a good mid-major, but they got hot in Maui, right? And I know you have some thoughts on one of their players in particular that we can get into here in a second, former Longhorn. But I just think that these types of tournaments are just a product of teams getting hot at the right time, and being able to put together a few good days in a row. I mean, heck, Boston College won a tournament last night. They beat Boise State, who we expect to maybe win the Mountain West. They have their flaws, but they beat Boise State in the Cayman Islands, and Boston College we projected to finish dead last in the ACC. So these types of tournaments are just very skewed to me.
Yeah, they're definitely weird, but they do expose some teams, and you need to figure out like kind of where your weaknesses are, and you got to figure out what your team is on the fly, and then certain matchups create different issues, and matchups are very big on these neutral floors. As for Maui, obviously, I don't really put that much stock into Maui, and we'll talk about the rims here in a few minutes and how it's benefited some certain players. But I think UConn kind of got the bad end of the stick here. They gave up through 2 games, 55% allowed from 3. It's just not realistic, really, like in 2 games. And it's still a good defense. But I mean, these analytical profiles for some teams are just plummeting just because of this tournament in general. Like every game is being played in the 80s. Like Iowa State is a top 3 defense in the country. They slid all the way down to like 15 or 16 in Ken Palm's rankings in 2 games because of shooting variance and these rims. Once again, like I'll probably never stop talking about these rims as long as the tournament is going on. But yeah, I mean, UConn, we'll get back into UConn a little bit. They have their own issues. Like they have plenty of issues outside of unfair shooting luck on the defensive side. Their guard play is not very good. Aiden Mahaney and Hassan Diarra are not it right now. They've been extremely disappointing this year. They're major downgrades from guys like, who they have, Tristan Newton, Cam Spencer, Jackson, Jordan Hawkins, guys like that, Stephon Castle. Like these guys aren't even close to that. Like right now, these guys aren't even really draft picks, and they just don't have any creators to initiate offense really.
They don't have a go-to guy, right? I mean, like the thing that was a concern coming in, but you thought that, okay, like they have such a good coaching staff, they can scheme some things up, and they have been able to, and they're going to still be a good team, but I think it really hinders their ceiling because of their lack of creators, right? Caravan's not a creator, right? Like he's what he was for that team last year, right? He's like a 3rd, 4th option type of guy that can knock down some open shots and be a solid like role player. McNeely is not like a guy that's going to create and get stuff off the bounce for people. Great shooter, going to be a good player for them, but I think that he's limited in what he can do. Mahaney, you obviously said, has struggled, but all that aside, like as a consumer, like that game was awesome. Like if you watched the last 5 minutes of that game in particular, like UConn was down, what was it, 13, 12?
Yeah.
And they clawed back and hit an awesome shot to tie the game, to send it to overtime. So, can't really complain too much as a consumer, but, UConn has some issues. Now in the Big East, as we've talked about, not very good. They'll probably be fine. But I think that there are teams that can expose them in that conference for sure.
Absolutely. St. John's is definitely one of those teams. Like if they can defend in space, if they can defend in the half court against like guys that aren't creators, like they don't have a guy late in the shot clock that can get downhill against any of those St. John's defenders. So like St. John's is like, it feels like they're kind of close to UConn right now, even though I'm not putting like a ton of stock into this tournament. Like you can see that UConn's not as talented, and then you don't have Donovan Clingan walking through the door anymore. Like that's the massive part about this defense. Like the defense is gettable on the interior. Like they weren't tested until they got to Maui, and they kind of got exposed. Like guys like Elijah Malone, who's in Colorado, who's an NAIA transfer. Like he was a really good NAIA player, but he shouldn't be like dominating this interior of UConn. But not dominating, but like producing and like being like an offensive hub for a team that just beat you. But yeah, Klingon, it just shows how great Klingon was and how much of a downgrade Samson Johnson and Tars Reed are. Like Reed had some positives on the offensive end, but you might have to start weeding out Samson Johnson from the rotation. I just don't really think it fits what they want to do on the defensive end. And like you have to play two completely different defensive styles when those two guys are in the game. And they got away with it last year just because Klingon was so good. And he obviously got a few more minutes than what Tars Reed's getting. But they're also fouling a ton too, which is very uncharacteristic of UConn. And that's part of them just getting beat off the dribble a little bit too often and not having that rim protector that they can trust.
Yeah. Well, I also think another part of being in Maui is that, you know, if you watch this tournament year after year, teams live in the bonus in this tournament, right? Like, I don't know what it is, just like the fast pace, high scoring, and then just everyone, it's packed into such a small gym that everyone's just on top of each other, that refs have a much quicker whistle, I think, than they typically do. So there's a lot more hand checks called. There's a lot more just softer fouls that wouldn't maybe be called in like a conference game. So you see teams getting into the bonus at 11, 12 minutes left and a half, which I don't necessarily agree with. And that's why some of these games are running late. And, you know, us working class people have to make the decision of whether to stay up and watch Dayton in North Carolina or go to sleep, which is it's the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have it in me to go to bed when I know a big game like that's on, regardless of how tired I am.
Sometimes I don't have a choice.
Oh, sometimes it just happens, but I try to fight it as long as I can. But yeah, I mean, we have to give credit to Memphis for what they did in that game. Obviously, besides the last 2.5 minutes, like UConn's press defense was textbook. Like you couldn't do it much better. But Memphis wasn't really. They didn't look like they had a plan for it either, and that's ultimately why this game, you know, ended up going to overtime on the Solomon Ball 3. But overall, these guards, they've exceeded expectations. Obviously, they've been great. They're shooting way over their heads. I'm referring to Tyrese Hunter as the Maui rim merchant. That's what I'm going to call him. I can't. How many times is this guy going to hit a 25, 27 footer off the front rim? It doesn't even bounce and it just rolls in. It happened like 2 or 3 times in the game against UConn. And it happened a few other, like he just got so hot that he felt like he could take any shot and it went in. It just happened to go in.
Coming into today, he was shooting 60% from 3 in the 2 games of the tournament, right? I don't know what he ended up shooting from 3 today.
53% this year. He's like 20 for 38. He's a 33% shooter on lower volume and more catch and shoot situations. He's just bombing away off the dribble and it works. Like he's going to go back.
Where was this at Texas?
I don't think it's a real thing. Like I'll be completely honest with you. This is not real. Like he might be closer to 35, 36. He's not 50. I'll tell you that. And obviously nobody's 50 with this like off the dribble kind of volume. Like not a lot of his threes have been assisted. But yeah, I mean, he looks a lot more confident, obviously, and definitely the most confident he's ever looked in his career. And him and Haggerty are definitely like one of the top guard duos in the country right now, and definitely the top guard duo in the American. So they're gonna do a lot of damage in that conference. But I mean, they're definitely playing over their head. But it's a talented roster. The roster construction's pretty ideal here. Like there's good balance offensively and defensively. There's no like true like glaring weakness with this team right now. And it's crazy how well they're performing, like with Penny Hardaway at the helm, with a brand new staff that he brought in like less than 2 months before the season started. He basically fired his entire assistant coaching staff, like in the middle of like the biggest time of the year in the preseason, like getting ready, establishing what you want, establishing your culture with a brand new team. And he got rid of all of his assistants, brings in a bunch of new guys that aren't necessarily like high up assistants, and they're figuring it out. And you know, you got to give them credit. They've been tested all year too. Like they haven't played an easy game this year, and they're besides Auburn, yeah, they kind of got dominated in that game, but they've passed all the tests that they need to pass.
Yeah. One guy on Auburn or on Memphis that I want to speak to real quick before we talk about Auburn and some of these other teams in Maui is Dane Danger. He put in some work this offseason. His body looks a lot better to me. Seems like he can play more extended minutes now. And I wasn't very high on him at Illinois last year. But he seems like he's really going to help them. I think he's averaging double figures right now and close to 60% shooting. He's going to help this team a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, besides the Michigan State game, he got into a ton of foul trouble, but no, he looks good. Like he can actually stay on the floor for extended periods of time. Like he can actually like move a little bit defensively as well.
Yeah.
He's never going to be an elite defender, but he has a more well-rounded game that he can actually stay on the floor for now. Like he got played off the floor at Illinois, and like his last year there, he was only playing like maybe 10 to 12 minutes a game. And it was kind of tough. He just got weeded out just because the conditioning wasn't there. And, he just didn't get up and down the floor well in general.
Yeah, no. Now, one team I want to touch on from Maui is North Carolina. They played Dayton in the opening round. I know this was a game you were all over Dayton. And they were down. UNC was down 21, like 16 minutes left in the game, 56-35. Looked like they were going to be playing in the consolation bracket of Maui, and they went crazy. Ended up winning 92-90 against Dayton, who appears to be a pretty good team. It seemed like that second half, like Dayton went completely away from what had been working. Early in the first half, UNC was feeling some pressure. Dayton was out really disturbing ball handlers, and UNC was turning it over. I think they maybe had 7 turnovers in their first 6 or 7 minutes of the game. And then Dayton kind of softened up. I don't know if it was like mentality wise, okay, like we're just trying to hang on, but UNC's too good to try and hang on against. Even if they're maybe not as good as they've been in years past, like they're still a really good team and have talented players, and one of the best players in the country in RJ Davis. So, and maybe Seth Trimble. I mean, that dude's been awesome. So, I know one UNC fan thinks he's going to make an all ACC team, which the way he's playing right now, it appears like he might. But regardless, right, I thought Dayton really got away from what they were doing. And I thought UNC did a really nice job in the second half of pushing Dayton's offense out from being right on the 3-point line to making them catch outside of scoring areas. So those dribble handoffs that they were doing in the first half, getting clean looks off those handoffs, they weren't getting in the second half because they were catching it out at 28, 30 feet and having to turn the corner, and they were getting in trouble that way. So I thought UNC did a really good job turning up the pressure, and I thought Dayton just got too lax in what they did, and so it was a perfect marriage for UNC to storm back and ultimately win the game.
Yeah, I mean, Dayton just struggled to generate offense in like 3 to 4 minutes into the second half, and it allowed Carolina to just get into their elite transition game, and that run just felt incredible for that. I mean, you can't stop Carolina in transition if you're not generating any offense of your own in the half court, and Dayton did an unbelievable job of that, along with forcing turnovers, like you said, and especially Elliot Cadeau was. I wouldn't say he was even careless with the ball. It was just him trying to make the perfect read, the perfect pass. Like we've talked about that with a few other guys, like Braden Smith. We've talked about it with him a little bit. It looked kind of similar to that. And, he had 6 turnovers in the game, and I think most of them were in the first half. He might have had 5 in the first half. But, he cleaned it up in the second half. And then Seth Trimble and Davis were unbelievable, and especially Trimble. Like, the offensive game is night and day from last year. I don't know if he was just not getting the opportunity, but, I mean, the jump shot's there now. Like, it looks way better when he has time and space.
I don't even know if it's the same guy. Like, for all we know, like, this is a different dude.
Yeah, I mean, he's been unbelievable. He makes an ACC team. I mean, I think he has to with the way he's playing right now. I think all 3 guards can make ACC teams with how talented they are. They need to carry this team because the front court just, I keep getting lower and lower on every single day. And especially Jalen Washington, who's been a disappointment. Like, he's not stretching the floor like he needs to stretch the floor because he's not a dominant rim presence. It's just been a little bit ugly on the front line. And like, they got truly exposed against Auburn when they had already gotten exposed a little bit against KU. Auburn is the best front line in the country, and it's not particularly close. So yeah, that was a little bit tough to watch them defensively in the first half against Dayton, and then the whole game against Auburn, really. But yeah, credit Dayton for their two efforts. Even though they've lost both games so far, and they got another test tonight against UConn. The offense looked good through the first two games. You know, you can put up, I believe it was 81 on Iowa State. That's a good offensive day, and they have plenty of shooters on this roster. And Zed Key is another guy that's kind of slimmed down as well to like be able to stay on the floor for defensive purposes. And I'm not like super high on him as a player overall. He doesn't do like anything at an elite level for a center. I think he's looked pretty good so far. And they were the better team against Carolina outside of that 8 to 10 minute stretch. I mean, the 8 to 10 minute stretch was very ugly, and it decided the game. They were the better team for 25 to 30 minutes.
Yeah. To me, watching Dayton in those two games, they look like come March, like they look like a team that should make the tournament. Like even if they don't win their conference, like that's the kind of team that you want to see in March from a committee's perspective, to me anyway, because they can compete with these teams. Right? They played two close games against Carolina and Iowa State, and I thought full well that Iowa State was going to roll them yesterday because, they had such a letdown blowing that 21-point lead to Carolina that they were going to come out flat and struggle with Iowa State. And they didn't, right? They hung around. It was a good game. So that showed me that they have some resilience in them, and like they're a good team. They're gonna have good wins this year. They can compete with just about anyone, it seems like. So props to them.
And the A10 is going to be possibly a multi-bid league again. It ended up being a multi-bid league by default last year when Duquesne got in, but I think there's two like really elite teams in the A10, like not elite on a national scale, but like enough to get in as an at-large in VCU, because they're really good as well. They're going to be battling for that top seed all year long.
Yeah. Let's shift gears to Auburn. Going back, this was my pick to win the tournament. And we talked about, right, in the last episode, we thought whoever won that game between Iowa State and Auburn was going to win the tournament. Happened to be Auburn that won it. And onto the championship they went. But they looked really good. Janai Broome looks like right now the player of the year in the country, dominating. He's really stretched his game out to be able to knock down the three. Tahad Pettiford apparently just plays well in big games because he's a gamer. He is a gamer, right? He doesn't really he hasn't looked good since that Houston game, and then comes into Maui and he plays great basketball again, knocking down shots, giving them what they brought him in to do. So Auburn looks scary right now. They have now three and a half very quality wins. I'll give them 4 even, winning on a third straight day against a team as hot as Memphis was in Maui. That's 4 really, really high level wins for Auburn, right? 4-0 against those teams: Houston, Iowa State, Carolina, and now Memphis today. So teams better look out.
Yeah, I'll concede Auburn is the best team in the country now. I'll take Houston off of the top spot. I'll knock Duke a little bit as well because those were my top 2 before. But I'm willing to call Auburn the best team in the country. And Janai Broome's game has just been. I wouldn't say he's improved his game a ton outside of the shooting. Like, he's been able to shoot it from the 4 position, so him and Cardwell can be on the floor at the same time. That's a massive trait for this team. Like, coming into the year when Pearl said he wanted to play Broom at the 4, I was a little bit skeptical because I didn't think the jump shot was really there. I mean, he just has to hit the open ones, but he's been able to do it at a high clip this year, and he's been phenomenal. And those two side by side just creates just a dominant front line. And then when you add in these super athletic wings, like it's so hard to score on this team when you're playing in the half court, and they don't really let you get into transition either. So it's the best like natural defensive team in the country. Like you look at teams like Houston and Iowa State, like they're system based defenses. Auburn can defend you in multiple ways. They can face any offense in the country and have a ton of success. They can shut down anyone. So, well, credit them. And yeah, Janai Broom as of now is the National Player of the Year with just his rim dominance on both sides of the floor. But I was impressed by Iowa State. They gave them the best game. They arguably outplayed them for a longer stretch of time. Like the whole first half. The whole first half, they were the better team, and they pressured Auburn a lot, and it like kind of, I wouldn't say exposed their guards, but gave them a super tough time. And Pettiford obviously showed up in the second half and made some big shots, and Broom was obviously dominant. With that finish at the rim to end the game. I mean, they're just inevitable. Like when it comes to scoring at the rim, so they're great. But I was very encouraged from what I saw from especially Joshua Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson. If those guys can like generate efficient offense through the post, along with their passing ability, I think it's going to create a lot for this offense. And there were some positives with this offense on the wing as well, and shooting wise. And Keyshawn Gilbert was really, really good. Obviously, Lipsy needs to get a bit better, but Gilbert was able to carry him for this entire tournament. So I'm pretty optimistic about my Cyclones. I'll just call them my Cyclones. They've been. I mean, I thought they should have won that game. It was pretty devastating to see them go down in the fashion that they did. They were gassed in the second half. Like when Auburn went on that run, you could just tell they were kind of deflated. They got a little bit of their energy back, but ultimately Auburn was just too good and too athletic.
Yeah, no, I'm very high on Iowa State, as we've talked about. This team's much different than teams in years past, especially in the offensive end. The one player I want to talk about on Auburn that we haven't talked about yet is Chad Baker-Mazara. He's been awesome too. He's really added an element to their team that they needed to play alongside Broom, especially where there's question marks with the guards. Right? I think he averaged like 60 in a game or something like that out in Maui. So if he can give them that consistently and shoot it efficiently like he has, like that's going to be a huge plus and make Auburn's offense even more daunting. One of the same guy who happens to be a Khalif Battle fan also happens to be a huge, huge Chad Baker-Mazara guy for whatever reason. But no, he looks good. He looks good.
Yeah, no, I've always been high on Baker-Mazara, since his days at San Diego State, and then he left for whatever reason to go play JUCO for a couple of years, and then came back, and he's been, a bit of revelation for Bruce Pearl. He's been fantastic. He's one of the best 3-and-D players in the country. I don't know if I'd call him necessarily a 3-and-D guy, but he perfectly fits into the system, and he's just one of the elite wing defenders in the country.
Yeah. So this tournament again didn't fail to disappoint. It was a great tournament, as it always is. Auburn taking home the crown this year, but I think we learned a lot about teams, and I think teams learned a lot about themselves in these 3 days. Teams got exposed, as you said, but also at the same time not going to overreact to results in a tournament where you have to play 3 days in a row. So, because that's just not realistic to how the rest of the season goes. So, definitely some concern for some teams, and some teams really look quite good. And with that, right, going to play a little game, buy or sell. We're going to go through a few different teams or situations across the country right now. I guess, pay homage to Around the Horn as the news came out. Anyone that knows about Around the Horn on ESPN, that's been around for 25 years or so, that show is going to be gone next summer. So we'll play a little buy or sell as they do on their show. So the first one, you already alluded to it, Cody, but I'll just reiterate it. Buy or sell, Auburn is the best team in the country.
Yeah, I'm definitely buying it. I'm definitely not all in on the Tigers, but they're the best team in the country as of now. They're the most battle-tested team in the country. You go beat Houston in Houston, and then you go through the Maui Invitational like it was nothing, basically, outside of game one against Iowa State. But yeah, they're just the most well-rounded team in the country. The guard play is finally there. These are the best guards as a group that they've had since probably their Final Four run in 2019. Those guards were elite as well. They're probably not as good as those guards, but they have so much, rim protection on the front line, and they have just way more balance in general. So yeah, they're the best team in the country until I can see otherwise.
Yeah. Now the next one, coming into the week, they were your second-ranked team in the country. Are we buying or selling that Duke's demise will be that they don't have good enough guard play?
I think they're going to be okay. I think Flag can take the pressure off these guards enough to have success, and I still think this team can make a Final Four run. Like, obviously, I mean, we saw last night that the late game execution still isn't there. Maybe they figure it out as the season goes on. Maybe it's a coaching issue. Maybe it's just they don't have that guard that they can go to, obviously. But Proctor's been positive, but they don't need to be Superman anymore because they have a guy like Cooper Flag, the most versatile player in the country, that he had a tough matchup last night against KJ Adams. He out-physicaled him and just gave him a ton of issues. Like, KJ Adams is like one of the most experienced, like, physical player. He could be a football player. This guy could play linebacker in the NFL, and Flag is not very big at all. And so he got pushed off his spot a bunch. Yeah. So I'm not going to overreact, and I think they're going to be fine. I don't think those guards need to be superheroes for them to make a deep run.
No, I agree they don't need to be superheroes, but I am a little bit concerned with their ability to create off the bounce, especially late games against good defensive teams. It's been kind of my concern, your concern that you alluded to earlier in the year, and I know you've been optimistic about it. But the more I watch them in some of these bigger games, I just worry that, like, they just don't have that guard that can get downhill to create. And Flag, I was listening to Seth Greenberg talk about Flag, and like, he thinks he's going to be fine as a creator in the NBA because there's more space and there's a shorter shot clock. But in the college game, right, there's just not a ton of space, especially on the team that Duke has right now, where they're not like elite shooters, right, especially at the guard position. And so when Flag, everyone's just kind of like watching him. And so I do have my worries about them. I still think they're very capable of making that Final Four run, but I think they're going to need some improvement, and they're going to need to figure some things out in terms of their late game execution, especially against these better teams.
For sure. And it's good that it's happening now, too. Like, you want this to happen early in the year, and then you can figure it out by the time March comes around, because you might not be playing in very many of these games in conference play, like, because the ACC looks down. There's a lot of teams at the top that we thought were going to be at the top that don't look very good. Like Miami, Wake Forest haven't really looked all that good this year. So they're not really going to get tested all that much, especially at home. Maybe they go on the road and have a couple tight games, but it's very good that this is happening right now. And I think over time, like, they're going to be able to optimize their lineups late in the games to where they're going to have enough shooting. Like, Knippel's a great shooter who hasn't really done much yet, but you can see that the tools are there, and he did it throughout the preseason as well. Just hit basically every shot he took. And, like, I like Proctor as a spot up shooter as well. And then you can throw Gillis into the lineup, who can hit shots from the corner anytime he's open. So yeah, I do think they have enough spacing late in games to be fine, but it's good that this is happening to Flag now.
Yeah. Now the final one, buy or sell. Indiana is a total dumpster fire, and Mike Woodson will be gone.
It's partly a dumpster fire. It's partly a bad matchup today, and it is partly that Woodson didn't make any adjustments and isn't a great coach, and they just got outmathed, I guess. Like he doesn't play the numbers really at all. They were trading 2s for 3s basically all game, and they turned the ball over a ton. So I mean, I'll buy it that it's more of a dumpster fire than it is a good team. Obviously, they're super talented, but I think they have a lot of fairly overrated players on their roster. Like I'm not very high on Miles Rice, even though a lot of people are. Umar Ballo he got exposed, and I don't think he really should have been on the floor all that much against Louisville today, unless you're giving him the ball literally every single possession, because they didn't really have an answer for him when he got touches, but he was getting spaced out. Mike Woodson was switching everything, so Ballo would get switched on to a guard almost every single possession. Then Louisville's guards would just get downhill, kick out, 3. Like it happened so many times, and Mike Woodson did not make one single adjustment. So I do think, I mean, if they go 500 in the Big Ten, like he's got to go. Like this team is too talented for him to like be borderline missing the tournament. So yeah, I'll buy it.
You know where Mike Woodson really belongs? The more I've thought about it, he belongs on like that, like NBA TV panel with like Channing Frye. He'd be really good, I think, on that panel. Like the thing that nobody really watches. Channing Frye might think more people are watching than actually are, but he'd fit in great there. I don't think he really fits in as Indiana's head coach anymore. I'm gonna bash Indiana here for a second and kind of eat my words. Take ownership for the credit that I gave them in the offseason, and then again on Sunday when I predicted they would win this tournament. Man, first of all, Trey Galloway needs to go away. He shouldn't have been welcomed back to Bloomington this season. The only way I could see him being allowed on the team is if you were allowed to like play tag at half court, and when you get to the offensive end, you're able to like tag someone else in. Because there was a possession today. It was a transition possession. He dribbled at the length of the court and kind of came in down the right slot and threw up some like fadeaway runner. I don't even know what to call it, and didn't even hit the rim. The guy has no offensive game whatsoever, and he's just such a marginal player. Like that's a guy who's playing far too many minutes for an Indiana team that like should be better. They have talented guys. I was one of those guys that was higher on Miles Rice. I don't know if it's just like he plays with some swagger, right? Or he did at Washington State last year, and so you kind of become attracted to that because he just makes plays and he's a very confident guy. But Ballo just doesn't look great. They're going to have a size advantage most games with him and Renew, but it really makes things challenging on the defensive end, especially if they're going to switch stuff with everyone. So I don't know. Like I think Indiana, I wouldn't go as far as to call them a dumpster fire just yet. Like I think they're trending that way. They're much more, as you said, a dumpster fire than not. And I think Mike Woodson should be very concerned for his job. But I think come Big Ten play, they'll be able to still have some success against teams because of their size. Some of the teams in the Big Ten that play multiple bigs, or a big that Ballo can just kind of hang out with for the game. So I still think they'll be okay, but I'm gonna kind of take a few steps back on the credit that I gave them for their offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're dumpster fire relative to how talented they are. Like this is a team that should go like 13-5, 14-6 in the Big Ten and have, be a top 3 team. So, and it doesn't look like they're going to be that just because I think their offense is outdated And I don't think Woodson's willing to dive into the analytics enough to. And there's a lot of coaches in the Big Ten that are like that. Izzo's kind of the same way, but obviously he's not even. We're not even going to go down that road of comparing Izzo to Woodson. Izzo's a fantastic defensive coach, but yeah, Woodson he has the talent. He needs to perform, and he's just not doing it right now because they've gotten away with some like bad performances against really bad teams so far at home. Like they had 3 games against teams that are outside of the top 200 that they hung around at halftime. They were trailing 1 game at halftime, and you're not going to get away with that against any quality competition in the Big Ten, which is most teams.
Right. Yeah. Now, before we talk about some players that have kind of stood out here, and talk about early thoughts about Battle for Atlantis outside of that Indiana game. There were some games in Vegas last night that were probably, if not for these other games being in tournament format, they were the best games on last night, right? We had Kansas, Duke, which we already touched on a little bit. And then we also had Houston and Bama, which was a great game. And Bama got a very big win. But now Houston has lost twice to ranked teams they lost to Auburn early in the season, first weekend of the year, and now they've lost to Alabama. So, is it time to panic if you're Houston?
No, I wouldn't think so. I thought they were the better team for a longer period of time against Auburn. Bama. I think Bama just might be Houston's kryptonite. They beat them 3 straight times, including one time 2 years ago at the Fertitta Center, and I believe it's because of Alabama being able to match, or at least be close to matching, Houston's physicality on the glass. I mean, Alabama had 20 offensive rebounds in this game. They out rebounded them by 9, I believe. And when you add in the spacing and the creation of Alabama, that makes it a super tough matchup because they obviously have the edge shooting wise and creation wise compared to Houston, especially when a guy like Milo Zuzan can't even stay on the floor. Like he played maybe 14 minutes and fouled out. Like that's a guy that needs to be on the floor for a team that doesn't have like super guard depth. Although Malik Wilson was solid.
If you're really wondering, he played 12.
Yeah, it's incredible. You can't foul out as a guard in 12 minutes. Like that's something that an undisciplined center does, like trying to block every single shot. Like Uzan did foul 5 times on the perimeter in 12 minutes. Like that can't happen for a starting point guard. Like, starting to miss Jamal Shed a little bit, it seems like. But Bama's shooting edge there was the biggest difference, along with being able to match their physicality. And like Auburn did the same thing. So it's kind of looking like if Houston can't absolutely dominate the rebound margin, then they become very human.
How about this one? Alabama was 11 for 30 from the field, or from 3, sorry. And they were 11 for 30 from 2. 22 for 60 overall. They shot 36.7%, but they made 11 threes, right? Both these teams didn't really shoot it spectacularly, but it was the threes of Alabama and the fact that they shot 30 for 41 at the foul line, right? You spoke to the fouls from Houston. They committed 30 fouls. They had 2 guys in their starting lineup foul out, and 2 guys have 4. Now they're a physical team, and so you maybe expect them to draw some whistles on some nights. But you got to be more disciplined than that. Like Sears shot 14 free throws. Those are layups for him. Now another player on Alabama, Holloway, played well again. He was 5 for 8 from the field, 2 for 4 from 3, had 14 points, 3 assists, 3 boards, only turned it over 1 time in 26 minutes. He seems to be maybe finding his way a little bit. They're getting good stuff out of him now after he kind of struggled out of the gate. Now he's played a couple good games against quality opponents in Illinois and Houston in the last 2. So, for their long-term outlook, especially with Chris Youngblood still to come back. I think this is a major, major positive for Nate Oates.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially like Grant Nelson isn't going to continue to make shots all year. I don't know how he shot it. I don't think it was great the other night, but all the way to step in and be that like third shot maker for this team is super important, at least until Youngblood comes back, because I think he's probably the more talented guard, the better shooter, and he's going to be able to seamlessly fit in. But just having all those weapons is going to make Alabama, an elite offense once again. And yeah, the fact that they didn't shoot it well and still won this game, like those are the type of games that Houston wins. Like when teams don't shoot well, the game's super physical. Houston wins that game every single time. But Alabama's done it to them 3 times now, where the game's been extremely physical and shots were falling in a few of the other games. But Houston, like they literally win every single one of these games, unless it's maybe like Iowa State, who's like matches their physicality and plays the same exact style. But yeah, it was super impressive for Alabama to contend with that front court of Houston, who like people consider it the best defensive front court in the country.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe Houston was more focused on the 5-star center they picked up yesterday and Chris Cenac Jr., however you say it. I know Sampson was on. He joined live for his commitment and spoke to that. That it was the kind of player they want. So maybe he was just too excited about the 5-star that they picked up. But if they're going to play like this, they're going to struggle to beat top level teams. If they're not going to shoot it well and they're going to be undisciplined on the defensive end and foul a bunch, they're going to be in trouble against good teams. Especially when Philon, who's played really well for Bama, he was 0 for 9. Like he only played 15 minutes because he couldn't throw in the ocean. He had several turnovers in his 15 minutes, so he struggled. And so it was good for Holloway. Wrightsell hit a few threes. Good for those guys to step up because I really expected Houston to win this game just by the fact of Chris Youngblood not being there. And it was going to depend on Sears and Philon, and Philon was not good, and Bama still found a way to win. So, props to Bama.
Yeah, I mean, tough matchup for Philon too. Like a young, fairly inexperienced guard that doesn't really shoot it well and isn't like a great guy in the catch and shoot game, because that's where you can beat Houston. Like he's not able to get downhill and get to the rim against this team like without having 3 bodies in front of him. So, really tough matchup for him, but it's a learning experience as well because he's going to play physical defenses in the SEC that are going to try to do the same exact thing. But overall, I think he's super talented. He's going to be okay.
Yeah. Now we already touched on the Duke Kansas game a little bit, but another quality win for Kansas. They've now beat Duke and Carolina. So great start to the year for them, even though they've had a little bit of a rocky start in terms of how it's looked.
Yeah, and to still beat Duke after Dickinson gets ejected with it was like 10 minutes left. I don't agree with the ejection. Personally, I don't want to dive into that really all that much, but I think it was more incidental than anything. But the fact that Flory Badunga can step in there and hold his own, like he's a really good defender. And if this would have happened last year, Dickinson gets ejected with 10 minutes left, they lose this game by double digits. Like Duke would have scored all over them at the rim, and they just wouldn't have had like any sort of lob threat there. And Badunga stepped in and was great. So, and he's the backup that they need to step in and play 8 to 10, maybe 12 minutes if Dickinson gets in foul trouble. And, I think he was kind of the unsung hero of last night.
Yeah. They were just efficient, right? They were efficient in what they did all across the board. Kansas was like, it wasn't a super high scoring game, like low 70s. But they shot it at 49%, 47% from 3. And they made basically all their free throws, right? So, they look good. And Duke continues. I know they both turned it over 16 times, but like Duke goes back to those guards. Like they need someone to kind of take control so they're not turning it over so much, because against good teams, like they're going to struggle to win games turning it over 16 times.
Yeah, and they just got punched in the mouth coming out of both halves. You start 16-3, and then you go 9-3 to start the second half. Like that was the difference in the ball game. Like I would say Duke played better through more longer stretches of the game. Like they were able to hold their own. Malik Brown was fantastic when Maluak went to the bench. I think he had 4 steals in this game and really bothered Dickinson and held his own when Dickinson was in the post for the time that he stayed in the ball game. But yeah, he was really good. Found some foul trouble and Maluak had to come back in. But overall, I think there were positives from both sides. Like Kansas proved that their defense isn't really a weakness in this game. They held their own against an offense that we have concerns about with Duke, but still a good offense in general. And yeah, both of these teams they're surefire Final Four contenders. It was a great game, and Knippel almost banked in that 3 to end the game. That would have been crazy. It would have made for one of the crazier games. Like it probably would have beat the Baylor and St. John's game that was played in the Bahamas for the game of the year.
Yeah. Now, also going on in Vegas last night was Oregon played Texas A&M, and Oregon's a team we haven't really spoken about at all. They're now quietly 7-0. They beat Texas A&M last night by 10, and then they turned around today and beat San Diego State by 10. And San Diego State whooped up on Creighton yesterday, right? They really controlled that game. And Oregon came out and took care of business against them today. So Oregon's quietly 7-0. They play USC next Wednesday. So they're off to a hot start. They were a team, that had some question marks, but seems to be playing some really good basketball right now.
Yeah, they have a ton of balance. Like there's no weakness. The offense and defense can hold its own against pretty much everyone. Even when Shellstad hasn't really been that good to start the year, he's been super inefficient. But they've also had to, they've had to make some comeback runs. And I think they've had to come back from down 10 plus against 3 teams. Like they had to do it against Portland, who is not a good basketball team at all. They were like a 30-point favorite in that game. And they had to go to overtime with a miracle comeback to end up winning that game. Down double digits at Oregon State. That's a rivalry game, so that's fine. Down double digits against Texas A&M, but Texas A&M once again pissed down their leg and they lost. Wade Taylor was prime.
Wait.
Shot chucking. You can go. You can have this. You can have.
I wanted this. 4 for 16. Yeah. About as Wade Taylor as it gets. 25%. He did have 15 points. He seems to find a way to always get to right around that number, but super inefficient shooting. Wade Taylor.
I think he bounced back today, though. If I'm not mistaken, I think he had a bounce back game.
I think he did.
Well, 7 for 19. 7 for 19.
Oh, okay. He
had a good start. It did not finish very well.
He did start well. What was the final of that game?
A&M 77-73. They had a little late comeback out of A&M. But yeah, in that game against Oregon, I think it's a Buzz Williams thing where his guards have full reign to do whatever they want. Like I'm not gonna give a pass to Wade Taylor. I've given a lot of passes to that guy throughout. He is a shot chucker. But I mean, he's probably the best shot chucker in the country. Like we could give him some credit for that. It's between him and Caleb Love, and I think Wade Taylor wins. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, A&M, they have a shot making problem, as they're always going to have. But I think their shot making is improved, and that only makes them a little bit better this season. But yeah, I mean, credit Oregon for making a comeback run. Nate Biddle's an unsung hero for this team. He's been healthy. His career has been overshadowed by injuries throughout his entire career. He's in the shadow of N'Faly Dante, who also had injuries. This team's finally getting rid of the injury bug, and
knock on wood.
They even made a run in the tournament with all these injuries last year. Like they made an incredible run through the Pac-12 tournament, took down Arizona in the final, and I think they're ready. They have a ton of underrated guards on their team. But Keyshawn Barthélemy he's playing very well this year, and along with TJ Bamba, who nobody really talks about, he had a down year at Villanova, but guess what? He was playing for Cal Neptune, so that's going to happen.
Everyone was down there.
Everyone had a down year. Everyone looked significantly worse, but we don't need to slander Villanova anymore. They just do it to themselves every night. TJ Bamba looks good. Bam Tracy, he's actually looked pretty solid as well. So this Oregon team is super underrated, and they should have success in the Big Ten. Despite we've talked about the home courts in the Big Ten, like they're going to have to go on the road and play in some super tough environments, and they're not going to give teams a tough environment in return. So it's going to be a grind for them all year, but I think they can hold their own.
Yeah. However, Creighton, right? I know, or Texas A&M just beat them tonight. Creighton, I'm very concerned for. I thought when in our last episode I picked them to beat A&M. It ended up being a good game. Ashworth was back, but man, they are not very good. They're struggling. They have Kalkbrenner, and that's really, I mean, Isaacs, Ashworth, but they just don't have. They're not a very deep team at all. They don't have a ton of scoring options. They don't really have a wing scorer. It's a big concern. I'm not very high on them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unproven shooting on this team. Like Pop Isaacs, everyone says he's like a good shooter, and he was supposed to come in and play more of an off-ball role this year and like have success in the spot-up game, but he had to play more on ball against San Diego State, and it looked terrible. Like the Creighton offense looked terrible against San Diego State. They dominated them, and they've just struggled to get Kalkbrenner the ball. Like if they don't have elite floor spacing around Kalkbrenner, it's just going to make this team worse on the offensive end in general. But getting Ashworth back, they put up 73 points tonight, so I guess a good A&M defense as well. But yeah, guys like Jemiah Neal, I don't really think he fits. He's a non-floor spacer, really not playing point guard. Like they're giving that role to Ashworth and Pop Isaacs. So I don't really know where he fits outside of being like a solid wing defender. You're trusting guys like Isaac Trout and freshman Jackson McAndrew, who like has a ton of promise, but those guys aren't really shooting the ball yet. They're not shooting the ball well yet. And, those guys need to be great in the spot up game. Mason Miller has been, I don't even know where he is. He's MIA.
He's non-existent.
Has he hit a three yet?
I don't know. Non-existent.
Like, he hadn't hit a three until
they can't even
coming
play
into
him
tonight. No, he's a horrible defender. And he needs to hit shots to have any value, and he's not doing it right now. So he's a huge minus on this team. So, I mean, long term, they're going to be okay. Ashworth is back. I think they've been a little bit unlucky shooting wise. They haven't really shot the ball well in their last 4 games. And I think they have better projected shooting than that, but it's not as elite as it has been the last couple of years where they've made some tournament runs.
Yeah, no. So we'll see. I mean, we could keep going on and on about some of these games. There have been so many good games. We haven't even talked about the battle for Atlantis yet, which we'll talk about in our next episode. As that will wrap up on Friday. But before we end the show, just want to highlight a few players that have played, really good basketball this season, especially this week during some of these tournaments. And one of my players is Janai Broom. I'm not going to touch on him too much more. He, as I already said, right now, if the season ended today, he's the National Player of the Year. Auburn hasn't lost yet. He's been the best player on the best team. He's been an elite rim protector, really spacing the floor now as a shooter, expanding his game. He's just been awesome. One player I do want to touch on is Ian Shiflin at Clemson. They're 6-1. He played really well at the Sunshine Slam, especially against Penn State in their last game. I think he almost had a triple-double. He had 18, 13, and 8. He's averaging right around 14 and 11. But in their last 3, he's put up pretty nice double-doubles. Against San Francisco, had 18, 13, and 5. So he's really been a good player for Clemson in terms of, not only creating offense, but also on the boards and creating shots for others, right? He's got 13 assists the last 2 games as a big man for them. So Clemson maybe is sneaking up there into that top 4 conversation of the ACC, especially if he continues to play like this. Because with the way that Miami,
they're definitely in there. I would have had Shefflin on my list as well. He's he was one of the most underrated players in the country last season, and now they're running some offense through him. He's been fantastic. And yeah, Clemson, I think they might be the third best team in the ACC.
Yeah. And then my final player before I let you get to yours, Cody, Dylan Harper. Last night against Notre Dame, overtime win, shot it at 54%, put up 36, 6 and 6. Believe he got to the line a bunch in this game as well. But, he's averaging, I think, close to 23 points a game right now on super efficient shooting, also putting up like 5 rebounds, 5 assists. He's looked to be the best freshman there at Rutgers, at least the most consistent between him and Ace Bailey. So he's been really impressive. And, I think a lot of NBA teams are going to be hoping that they can pick him in next June's draft.
Yeah, Dylan Harper's been the way better freshman. I think Ace Bailey shoots them out of games, and that was the only reason why Notre Dame stuck around. But yeah, Harper is he has a super mature game for his age. I mean, playing the point guard position at 6'5", like being able to get downhill against anyone. He's been super impressive. Yeah, and I'll just dive right into my players. I had a guy on the other side of this game actually, in Matt Alako, on Notre Dame. He stepped up when Marcus Burton got hurt, like 3 minutes into the game, like was the de facto point guard here in this game, and I think he finished with like 24 points. And in overtime, he had a 9-point stretch in 30 seconds, and he also tied the game up in regulation with just a heave over the top of his head, and it happened to fall from about 27 feet. So, but yeah, he went on a little bit of a Tracy McGrady run, although it was a loss. I can't compare that guy to Tracy McGrady, but hey, he had a
Tracy McGrady moment. He's not.
Yeah, minus the win and minus the 4 points he would have needed to get to McGrady. But right. I'll credit him for stepping up in a time of need for Shrewsbury. Yeah, Shrewsbury was another reason why they stuck around. He's a top 5 coach in the country. We know we buy stock in that guy. Another guy I have is Maxime Raynell, who's been unbelievable this year. He's averaging 24 and 13 for Stanford. They're sit at 6-1, although they lost to Grand Canyon the other night. Like, you can run offense through this guy. Like, they don't really have a point guard on this roster, but they just give him the ball at the mid post, in the low post, and tell him to go to work. They send 2 guys at him. He makes the right pass. They play him straight up, and he gets a bucket basically every single time. He's probably like the most underrated center in the country. Like, he has, like, talent wise, especially, he's phenomenal. The last guy played today, that's Javon Small, who obviously we're going to talk
awesome.
We're going to talk about Atlantis a little bit later, but he carried West Virginia to a win over Gonzaga. He had 31 and 7. I didn't really see all that much of this at Oklahoma State where he was last year, but you could obviously see the tools. But he made some unbelievable plays. Was able to create his own 3-point shots off the dribble, and yeah, he was ultimately the reason that they won this game. And I bought a lot of stock in West Virginia today for their effort. I think, Darian DeVries is also one of the best coaches in the country. Him bringing his son over, and Tucker DeVries, Tucker's probably the best player on this team, but Javon Small being that guy that can play next to him creates one of, like, definitely the most underrated 2-man combo in the Big 12, but it could end up ultimately being a top 5 duo. So credit Javon Small for that effort, and just the West Virginia team in general.
Yeah, that was an impressive win. I did not expect them to go take down Gonzaga, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the week when we do a full analysis on Battle for Atlantis. But yeah, as for today, that wraps up the Maui. Another year gone of the Maui, another fun tournament, 41st edition of it. First one without Bill Walton, unfortunately. I know they paid homage to him out there. They did like a little bit of a tribute on ESPN, I think, to him for it. So that was pretty cool, even though I'm not a big Bill Walton guy, as you learned last episode, but pretty cool nonetheless. But yeah, bunch of exciting games this week, more to come. Stay tuned. We're going to be doing, I think, another giveaway for Thanksgiving that we're kind of doing impromptu. And there also may be some new content that we start creating, so stay tuned on some of that stuff. and then continue just to follow along on the website, get active in the Discord, and be on the lookout for some of the articles that we're putting out, and really appreciate the listens as always. Hope everyone has a good Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you later in the week as we dive into what will probably be a huge shakeup in the AP poll, and the battle for Atlantis, wherever that ends up going. So that's it for now, and we'll talk to you next time.